August 21st, 1942. The humid night air of Guadalcanal clings like a shroud to the dense jungle fringe along the Ila River, now swollen with the rains of the monsoon season that have turned the ground into a quagmire of red mud and decaying vegetation. Moonlight filters weakly through the canopy of towering banyans, ferns, and tangled vines, casting erratic shadows on the coral sand beach where Japanese soldiers of the 1st Battalion, 28th Infantry Regiment huddle, in the flickering glow of cigarette embers and the soft, persistent hiss of rice being warmed over small, concealed fires built from driftwood and palm fronds. The scent of salt spray from the nearby Solomon Sea mingles with the earthy raw of the island's undergrowth, the sharp, metallic tang of gun oil from freshly cleaned Arisaka rifles, and the faint, fermented aroma of sake poured from canteens into makeshift cups fashioned from coconut shells. Laughter ripples through the ranks, low, triumphant murmurs as toasts are raised to the Emperor's eternal glory and the swift victory that seems within grasp. Colonel Kaneo Ichiki, his face etched with stern resolve in the wavering firelight, his uniform damp with sweat and streaked with the grime of the landing, nods approval to his officer, convinced that his vanguard of 917 men has pierced the American lines undetected after a grueling night march from the western beaches. Scouts, their faces smeared with camouflage grease paint, report back in hushed tones. The enemy camp lies just beyond the river's bend, a vulnerable cluster of tents and supply dumps ripe for the bonsai charge at first light. Victory feels palpable, inevitable. This forsaken speck in Solomons, with its malarial swamps and jagged reefs, will soon hoist the rising sun banner high. But in the pre-dawn stillness, broken only by the distant cry of a fruit bat and the lap of waves on the shore, a low rumble builds from the east, not the roll of thunder from the gathering clouds, but the mechanical growl of idling engines and the creak of men shifting in their positions. And then from the smoke of cooking fires mingling with the haze of tropical mist that blankets the riverine flats, indistinct shapes emerge, the silhouettes of American Marines, rifles at the ready, their defensive perimeter fortified with coils of barbed wire, sandbag revetments, and tripod-mounted machine guns, unseen and unheard, until a moment of absolute reckoning descends like a veil lifting from the abyss. To grasp the profound stakes of this nocturnal interlude on Guadalcanal, one must trace the intricate threads back to the broader, tumultuous canvas of the Pacific War, where the Empire of Japan had staked its imperial ambitions on an audacious gamble of lightning conquest across Southeast Asia and the vast expanses of the South Pacific. The devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, 8 aircraft carriers launching 353 planes that sank or damaged 18 U.S. ships, including the battleships Arizona and Oklahoma, killing 2,403 Americans, had stunned the world, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet's battleship strength and opening a narrow window for Japan's meticulously planned Southern expansion doctrine. This strategy, articulated by the brilliant but prescient Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, chief of the combined fleet, and formally endorsed by the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo under the direction of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and Army Chief of Staff General Hajime Sugiyama, aimed to seize resource-rich territories to offset Japan's chronic shortages of oil, rubber, and metals. In the 7 months following Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces executed a series of breathtaking victories. The fall of Wake Island on December 23, 1941, after heroic but doomed Marine defense, the conquest of the Philippines by May 1942, where 76,000 American and Filipino troops surrendered in the infamous Bataan Death March, enduring 65 miles of brutality that claimed 10,000 lives, the rapid overrunning of Malaya in Singapore in February 1942, capturing 85,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops in the largest capitulation in British military history, and the seizure of the Dutch East Indies by March 1942, securing 80% of Japan's oil needs from Borneo's fields. These triumphs, fueled by the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier striking force under Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo and the Army's veteran divisions honed in the brutal quagmire of China since 1937, extended Japan's perimeter to include key atolls in Solomons and New Guinea, threatening Allied supply lines to Australia and New Zealand. Guadalcanal itself, a rugged, 90-mile-long by 25-mile-wide island of volcanic soil, dense rainforests, and treacherous coral reefs, held little intrinsic economic value. No oil wells, no rubber plantations, merely a scattering of coconut plantations worked by indentured Melanesian laborers. Yet its strategic significance was immense. Positioned at the southeastern edge of the Japanese defensive arc, just 1,100 miles from Australia's northern coast. In late June 1942, Japanese construction troops of the 11th and 13th Construction Units, under command of Captain Minoru Yamasaki, had begun carving a vital airfield from the coral flats and muddy clearings near Lunga Point on the island's northern shore. Dubbed the Japanese Henderson Field in initial plans, this airstrip was intended as a forward staging point for long-range reconnaissance and bombing missions against Allied convoys, potentially interdicting the vital sea lanes that sustained General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Command. The airfield's completion would have allowed G-4M Betty bombers from Rabaul, Japan's bustling fortress on New Britain, 550 miles to the northwest, to dominate the Coral Sea and isolate Australia, forcing the Allies into a defensive crouch far from the Philippines and Indonesia. The U.S. response was swift and resolute, marking the first major Allied counteroffensive in the Pacific theater. In the wake of the Doolittle raid on April 18, 1942, 16B, 25 Mitchell bombers launched from a carrier Hornet under Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, striking Tokyo and other cities in a morale-boosting pinprick that killed fewer than 50 but humiliated the Japanese High Command. The American Joint Chiefs of Staff, chaired by Admiral Ernest J. King and Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, authorized Operation Watchtower during the June 1942 conferences in Washington. This amphibious assault, code-named for its goal of watching and containing Japanese expansion, involved landing 11,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division on August 7, 1942, under the overall command of Major General Alexander Archer Vandegrift, a veteran of the Nicaragua interventions with a reputation for methodical planning. Supported by Task Force 62, 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, Wasp, 7 cruisers, and 22 destroyers under Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, the Marines came ashore at Tulagi, Gavutu, Tenambogo, and Guadalcanal itself, facing only scattered resistance from 2,200 Japanese laborers and a handful of troops. By dusk on August 8th, the airfield fell intact, its unfinished runway a godsend. The Marines rechristened Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton R. Henderson, a dive bomber pilot killed at Midway 2 months earlier. Overnight, Marine engineers from the 1st Pioneer Battalion worked feverishly under floodlights, using captured Japanese tools to extend the strip to 3,400 feet, enabling the arrival of the Cactus Air Force, initially 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 19 SPD Dauntless dive bombers, by August 20th. This air umbrella immediately challenged Japanese dominance, sinking the transport Kanuga Maru and damaging others in initial landings. This island outpost, with its incessant downpours averaging 100 inches annually, malarial swamps teeming, with Anopheles mosquitoes that would infect 75% of American troops, razor-sharp Kenai grass that sliced skin like paper, and a terrain of steep ridges and riverine barriers, mattered not for its natural bounty, but for its pivotal role in the attritional war of endurance that would define the Pacific Campaign. Japan, an archipelago nation of 73 million people hemmed in by geography and embargoed resources, its pre-war oil reserves depleted to 10% by U.S. sanctions in 1941, adhered rigidly to the decisive battle concept, a naval inheritance from Admiral Hyakuro Togo's annihilation of the Russian fleet at Tsushima in 1905. This doctrine envisioned a single, climactic fleet engagement, preferably around the Philippines or Marianas, to shatter the U.S. Navy and force a negotiated peace. The Imperial Army, meanwhile, emphasized infantry assaults rooted in Bushido, the warrior code of loyalty, courage, and death before surrender, bolstered by the 1941 Shinjinkan Code that forbade retreat and glorified sacrificial charges. In contrast, the United States, with its continental expanse, population of 132 million, and industrial output that would produce 300,000 aircraft and 88,000 tanks by war's end, pursued a Germany-first strategy in Europe, but a parallel island-hopping campaign in the Pacific under Admiral Chester W. Nimitz's Pacific Ocean Areas Command. This methodical advance, bypassing fortified atolls to seize key rings, leveraged America's shipbuilding miracle. By 1943, yards in California, Washington, and Maine were launching destroyers at a rate of 1 per week, Essex-class carriers at 1 per month, and Liberty ships at 2.5 per day from Henry Kaiser's assembly line. The Marines on Guadalcanal, drawn from the nation's diverse fabric, farm boys from the Kansas wheat fields, steel workers from Pittsburgh's mills, clerks from New York's bustling streets, and immigrant sons from Chicago's ethnic enclaves, embodied the democratic ethos, a volunteer and draftee force united not by imperial decree or racial hierarchy, but by a constitutional commitment to repel unprovoked aggression and restore the pre-war balance. The battle for Guadalcanal would endure 6 grueling months, from August 1942 to February 1943, consuming 1,600 American lives, including 1,100 Marines, wounding 4,200, and claiming 24,000 Japanese dead or missing, over 90% fatalities, while sinking 35 Japanese warships and damaging 20 more. At the cost of 2 U.S. carriers, Wasp and Hornet, and 7 cruisers, it marked the war's turning point, where Japan's southward thrust stalled, its supply line stretched to breaking, and the Allies seized the initiative that would lead to Tarawa, Saipan, and ultimate victory. For the Japanese troops of Colonel Ichiki's elite Sendai detachment, drawn from the 2nd Sendai Division, one of the Imperial Army's premier units with a history of conquest in Manchuria and the Russo-Japanese War, the Guadalcanal expedition promised a glorious chapter in the annals of Bushido. These 917 men, veterans many of them from the savage campaigns in China, where they had overrun Shanghai in 1937 and Nanking in 1937-38, enduring and inflicting atrocities that scarred the continent, arrived via the neutral port Truk in the Caroline Islands, a lagoon fortress teeming with submarines and seaplanes. Ichiki's orders, relayed from the 17th Army headquarters in Rabaul under Lieutenant General Harakichi Hyakute, a rigid tactician schooled in the Siberian intervention of 1918, emphasized operational speed and surprise, land on the western beaches near Teva Point under cover darkness, execute a 12-mile night march eastward to the coastal jungle for the Tenaru River, known to the Japanese as the Ilu, and launch a decisive banzai assault on the airfield at dawn to annihilate the few 100-inch American defenders reported by reconnaissance float planes from the cruiser Ubery. Expectations among the ranks were sky-high, inflamed by imperial propaganda disseminated to the pages of the Asahi Shimbun newspaper and crackling NHK radio broadcasts that portrayed the Gaijin, white foreigners, as racially inferior, softened by material comfort, and lacking the spiritual steel of the Yamato race. Soldiers like Private First Class Hiroshi Tanaka, whose recovered diary entries described a voyage from Truk, anticipated a replay of earlier triumphs, the swift bayonet charges that had toppled Dutch garrisons in Java or British lines in Burma. Officers, including Captain Sakae Oru of the First Company, penned letters home evoking the legends of samurai from the feudal era, envisioning Guadalcanal as another easy conquest akin to the rapid falls of Guam on December 10, 1941, or Wake Island after a 15-day siege. As the destroyers of the transport group, 6 vessels, including the transport Azuma Semaru, slipped undetected through the slot, the treacherous 200-mile channel between Guadalcanal and Savo Island, the troops sharpened their 17-inch bayonets on whetstones, recited passages from the Sinjinkin Code mandating, "Do not be taken prisoner alive," and shared tales of American cowardice gleaned from captured leaflets. In the humid confines of the troop transports, morale soared. Sake was rationed out in small measures. Rice balls, onigiri, wrapped in bamboo leaves, were distributed, and songs of imperial victory echoed softly below decks. They braced for the exhilarating rush of the charge, the imagined collapse of enemy morale under the onslaught of the rising sun's emblem, and a triumphant return to the relative comforts of Rabaul's barracks, with its beer halls and geisha houses within days. The war, in their minds, was a divine mandate, and this island a mere stepping stone to the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Reality descended upon them like the acrid smoke from their victory fires, thick and suffocating, as the American counterattack materialized from the enveloping gloom of the pre-dawn jungle, transforming anticipation into a nightmare of unrelenting slaughter. At approximately 4:30 a.m., as Ichiki's 917 men, fatigued from the 18-hour landing and march, but exhilarated by their undetected approach, forded the waist-deep, murky waters of the Ilu River, their premature cheers of triumph echoed faintly through the mist-shrouded mangrove. They had probed the marine perimeter earlier that night, mistaking the glint of barbed wire for abandoned obstacles and the distant glow of Henderson Field's lights for a sign of lax security. Now, surging forward in the classic bonsai formation, dense waves of soldiers in khaki uniforms and pith helmets, Arasaka Type 38 rifles with fixed bayonets held at the high port, officers waving katana swords to urge the advance. They expected to overrun the supposed tent city of a demoralized, undersupplied foe in a matter of minutes, the air filled with their rising cries of "Bonsai! Tenno Haika Bonsai! Long live the Emperor!" as they funneled into the narrow sandbar flanked by the river and a 20-foot-high coral embankment. Envisioning the Americans fleeing in panic, their positions crumbling like the paper tigers of propaganda lore. Instead, they collided with meticulously prepared killing ground orchestrated by the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, under the indomitable Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Burwell Chesty Puller, a 45-year-old Virginian with a chest full of medals from Haiti and Nicaragua, who had reinforced the eastern perimeter with 2 rifle companies, A and B, a weapons platoon, and supporting elements from the 2nd Battalion. Over the preceding 2 weeks, since the initial landings, Puller's men, 1,200 strong, had labored under Van de Grift's directive to fortify the Lunga perimeter, a 15-mile defensive arc around the airfield, barbed wire concertina rolls, salvaged from supply dumps, and stretched in triple layers, funnel the attackers into predetermined kill zones along the 300-yard-wide sandbar. From shallow foxholes scraped into sandy soil amid coconut groves and kanai grass, water-cooled Browning M19 17.30 caliber machine guns, each fed by 250-round belts of linked ammunition, chattered with mechanical fury at 500 rounds per minute, their barrels glowing red-hot under sustained fire. Grenades, Mk2 pineapple fragmentation types, weighing 14 ounces and lethal within 15 yards, arced in graceful parabolas from riflemen hunker behind sandbags, while 60mm mortars from Battery C, 1st Battalion, 11th Marines, positioned 400 yards inland, dumped high-explosive shells into the riverbed and embankment, churning the shallow waters into a frothing cauldron of mud and blood. A platoon of 37mm M3 anti-tank guns, dragged forward by hand through the night, added to the carnage with canister rounds. Buckets of steel balls equivalent to giant shotgun blasts that sighed down entire squads at 50 yards. The emotional chasm between the Japanese soldiers' buoyant expectations and the harrowing reality yawned, as wide as the slot itself, a shattering of illusions forged in the furnace of overconfidence and cultural indoctrination. These men, buoyed by the night's stealthy infiltration, the shared camaraderie around the fires where they had warmed their meager rations of hardtack and dried fish, and the spiritual armor of emperor worship, had steeled themselves to the heroic clash of steel on steel, the bayonet's thrust as the ultimate arbiter. They anticipated the thrill of breaking the enemy's will, watching tents collapse and supplies burn, perhaps even capturing a few demoralized prisoners to parade back to Rabaul as proof of Aryan-like superiority. Instead, they encountered a disciplined wall of industrialized firepower from an enemy they had dismissed as effete consumers of Hollywood films and hot dogs. The Marines, their faces blackened with camouflage paint, bodies lean from C-ration meals of Spam, beans, and hard chocolate, poured disciplined, interlocking fields of fire from positions that had been rehearsed in the Nevada desert maneuvers of 1941. The contrast was visceral and immediate. Japanese volleys from their bolt-action Arasakas, reliable 6.5mm weapons with a 5-round internal magazine, effective to 400 yards but slow to reload under pressure, crackled sporadically, felling a handful of Marines in the initial rush. But the tide turned savagely as the M1 Garand rifles of the Marine riflemen barked in semi-automatic rhythm, each 8-round and block clip, delivering .30-06 slugs at 2,800 feet per second, punching through uniforms and flesh at ranges up to 500 yards. The distinctive ping of the empty clip ejecting from the Garand's receiver echoed like a tolling bell amid the din, a sound that would haunt survivors as a harbinger of doom. Private Herbert Monagle, a 22-year-old rifleman from company later awarded the Navy Cross for his action, recalled in a 1943 debriefing at Noumea the raw shock on the attackers' faces, waves of humanity breaking against the guns like relentless surf on an unyielding reef, bodies piling in heaps that tripped the living. Officers like a cheeky, urging his men from the rear with pistol in hand, expected to lead a rout. Instead, they witnessed annihilation. By 5:45 a.m., as the first rays of sun pierced the smoke and mist, the river ran crimson, choked with floating corpses. The assault devolved into isolated knots of hand-to-hand fighting on the embankment, where Marine combat knives and rifle butts met desperate bayonet thrusts. Ichiki himself fell at 6:15 a.m., a .30-06 round through his head as he rallied a final charge, his body later identified by the colonel's insignia amid the 789 Japanese dead, nearly 90% of his force. Only 30 survivors, including a few wounded officers, melted into jungle, their dreams of glory reduced to the agony of flight. The Marines tallied 44 killed and 75 wounded, a lopsided exchange that laid bare the obsolescence of human wave tactics against the mechanized precision of a modern democracy at war. Historical records illuminate the Tenarue River engagement, later formalized as the Battle of the Tenarue in Marine annals, with unflinching clarity and a wealth of corroborating detail, drawn from declassified documents, personal accounts, and captured enemy materials that paint a tableau of hubris met by resolve. The U.S. Marine Corps' official after-action report, compiled by Van de Griff's staff in the sweltering intelligence tent at Henderson Field and archived in the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, details the engagement's precise chronology. Japanese landings commenced at 11 p.m. on August 18, 1942, undetected amid the chaos following the devastating naval battle of Savo Island 2 nights earlier, where a Japanese cruise destroyer force under Vice Admiral Genichi Mikawa sank 4 Allied heavy cruisers, Quincy, Vincennes, Astoria, Canberra, and damaged 3 more in a 45-minute night action, killing 1,077 sailors and handing the U.S. its worst defeat since Pearl Harbor. Ichiki's detachment, transported by 6 destroyers, Yukike's, Matsuke's, and others, from a Tokyo Express precursor run, beached at Taivu Point without opposition, as Marine patrols were stretched thin, covering 20 miles of coastline. Ichiki's personal diary, recovered from his body by a Marine burial detail on August 22nd and translated in the 1945 U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's Pacific Annex, reveals the commander's unbridled hubris. The enemy dispositions are weak. A spirited night attack will crush their morale and seize the airfield before reinforcements arrive. Japanese Imperial Army logs from 17th Army headquarters in Rabaul, captured intact during the Bougainville invasion in November 1943 and analyzed in the U.S. Army Center of Military History's 1948 Guadalcanal study, confirmed the premature optimism that permeated communications. Radio traffic intercepted on August 20th by Australian coast watchers buzzed with coded reports of successful infiltration and enemy inactivity, prompting celebratory toasts in Rabaul's officer clubs with imported scotch and local sake. Eyewitness accounts from the 27 Japanese survivors interrogated by U.S. Army G-2 intelligence officer in a makeshift stockade on Espiritu Santo in September 1942 described the pre-assault rituals in vivid detail. Impromptu feasts around beach fires of tinned mackerel, imported from Formosa, rice balls flavored with soy paste, and small cups of sake doled out as a reward for march, with soldiers composing haiku verses praising the emperor's benevolence. One survivor, Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, recounted in his 1946 testimony at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal the moment of false dawn. We sang of victory, our bayonets sharp as our spirits, believing the Americans slept in fear. On the American side, the defensive preparations were a masterclass in anticipation, bolstered by human intelligence networks that pierced the Japanese veil. Coast watchers, Allied civilians, and Fijian scouts like the legendary Martin Clemens, a 28-year-old Australian planner embedded on Guadalcanal since July, relayed sightings of the approaching destroyers via teleradio sets hidden in the hills, their messages prefixed with the code successful to confirm authenticity. PT boats patrolling the slot, including PT 109 under Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, though not directly involved here, provided additional eyes, while aerial reconnaissance from a lone PBY Catalina out of Espiritu Santo spotted the landings at dusk on August 18. Puller, alerted by Van de Griff's Operations Center, reinforced the Tenerife sector overnight with companies A and B of the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, each 200 men armed with M1 Garand and Bar automatic rifles, plus a section of 37mm guns from the 1st Special Weapons Battalion and 275mm pack howitzers from the 11th Marines, which fired 15 shells each into the Japanese forming up area at 3 a.m. The Marine Corps Gazette September 1942 issue, drawing from preliminary reports, quantified the firepower: 18 machine guns, 200 rifles, and 12 mortars arrayed in depth, with ammunition stocks of 10,000 rounds per gun position, shipped from the advanced base at Tulagi. Post-battle forensics, including photographs taken by Marine combat correspondents like Sergeant John Buscemi, showed the sandbar littered with 834 Japanese bodies, the official count after patrols cleared the area, many clustered in windrows from the wire entanglements, alongside discarded Arisakas, ammunition pouches, and personal effects like family photos and imperial flags. Van de Griff dispatched to Admiral Nimitz on August 22nd, 1942, wired from Henderson Field's rudimentary radio shack, proclaimed with understated triumph, "The enemy launched a savage and determined attack at dawn this morning. Despite great bravery, they were annihilated before reaching our line." Japanese records, pieced together from Rabaul signals traffic decoded by the U.S. Navy's FRUPAC unit in Pearl Harbor using captured code books from the Battle of Midway, revealed a high command shock. A September 1st message from Hayakatake to Tokyo admitted Ichiki detachment destroyed, cause unknown but suspected strong defenses. The M1 Garand, that unyielding and resonant symbol of American abundance, threaded relentlessly through the fray like a recurring auditory motif, its metallic ping punctuating the chaos as a refrain of democratic might and inexhaustible resolve. Adopted by the U.S. Army in 1936 after exhaustive trials spanning the Great Depression, where prototypes endured 100,000-round endurance tests in the snowy ranges of Aberdeen Proving Ground, this gas-operated, semi-automatic rifle, chambered for the hard-hitting .30-06 Springfield cartridge, featured a 24-inch barrel, walnut stock, and an innovative en-bloc clip system that loaded 8 rounds at once, enabling a trained rifleman to deliver 40 aimed shots per minute with accuracy to 500 yards. Weighing 9.5 pounds unloaded, it was a far cry from the bolt-action Springfields of World War I, offering a firepower multiplier that embodied the ingenuity of American designers like John C. Garand, a Canadian-born engineer who refined the weapon through iterations at Springfield Armory. Mass-produced initially at the Rock Island Arsenal and later by contractors such as Winchester Repeating Arms in New Haven, Connecticut, and Harrington and Richardson in Worcester, Massachusetts. Over 4.5 million Garands would roll off assembly lines by 1945, each rifle a product of the nation's wartime mobilization under the War Production Board. This was abundance not born of exploitation, but of democratic collaboration, assembly lines humming under protections of the Wagner Act's union rights, with women welders in overalls, echoing the iconic Rosie the Riveter, pouring molten steel in foundries from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, to the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California. The Garand represented the plenty of society where innovation flowed freely from taxpayer-funded research at institutions like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and open debates in congressional hearings, contrasting sharply with Japan's ration output, where steel shortages limited rifle production to 3 million total by war's end. In the hands of Marines like Sergeant John Basilone of Company C, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, who, though manning a water-cooled machine gun in supporting role, trained the squad in Garand marksmanship, the weapon turned the tide, its pings marking the fall of attackers as clips were slammed home and fired in the humid dawn. Each ejection, a sharp, unmistakable ping that carried over the roar of battle, symbolized not mere mechanical efficiency, but the equity of American democracy. Every rifleman, from the raw recruit out of boot camp at Parris Island to the seasoned non-com, wielded the same tool of precision defense, forged in a nation that could afford to equip, feed, and sustain its fighters with 4,000 calories daily from stateside farms, while Japanese troops scraped by on 1,800 calories of rice and fish. Paste. This cataclysmic clash of the Tenarue River rippled outward to the Japanese military establishment like shockwaves from a depth charge, eroding the unshakable faith in Bushido's invincibility and the divine, emperor-centered ideology that had propelled the empire's conquest. Prior to Guadalcanal, the Imperial Japanese Army's worldview was enshrined in the 1937 Kokure no Hangi, Fundamentals of Our National Polity, a doctrinal pamphlet distributed to every soldier that exalted the emperor as a living god, the Japanese people as his eternal subjects, and warfare as a sacred duty where spiritual purity trumped material inferiority. This ideology, reinforced by the 1930s military coups and the cult of the sword, had proven efficacious in earlier campaigns. The human wave assaults in the Battle of Shanghai in 1937, where 200,000 Chinese casualties dwarfed Japanese losses of 40,000. The rape of Nanking 1937-38, where bayonet charges overwhelmed disorganized offenders. And the rapid advances in French Indochina 1940-41, securing border salients with minimal attrition. Ichiki's detachment embodied this ethos. Elite shock troops selected for their zeal, many bearing tattoos of rising suns and carrying personal amulets from Shinto shrines. The Tenarue defeat forced a profound, if initially suppressed, introspection within the high command. In Tokyo, at the Imperial General Headquarters War Room in the Ichigaya Heights, Prime Minister Tojo, doubling as War Minister, and Sugiyama poured over fragmentary reports arriving via undersea cable from Rabaul, their faces grim under the harsh lights of strategy maps marked with red arrows denoting the southern operations. Tojo, a stern ultranationalist scarred by the Siberian winters of 1905, ordered an immediate reinforcement. The veteran 2nd Ichiki, division under Major General Kotake Koguchi, comprising 6,000 men, was retasked from New Guinea for a flanking assault via the southern beaches in early September. Yet, the Tenarue's body-strewn sandbar became a haunting, unspoken emblem of vulnerability. Japanese propaganda, controlled by the Cabinet Information Bureau, censored the disaster, framing it in Asahi Shimbun dispatches as a heroic stand, with vague claims of heavy enemy losses, but whispers of the truth infiltrated the ranks through returning wounded and smuggled letters. Lieutenant General Hakatake, upon personally surveying the aftermath during his arrival in late August, his transport to destroyer Hayashio dodging submarine patrols, confided his chief of staff, Colonel Isamu Cho, in notes preserved in the Yasukuni Shrine's wartime archives. The Americans fight not as the weaklings of our doctrine, but as demons entrenched in iron. Spirit alone will not suffice against such abundance. This admission marked an early fracture. The ideology of inevitable, spirit-driven triumph began to crack, with frontline soldiers questioning the Senjinkin's mandate for certain death, as evidenced by a spike in unauthorized retreats, from negligible pre-1942 figures to isolated incidents reported in 17th Army logs by mid-1943. The transformation deepened inexorably as the Guadalcanal campaign ground onward through the rainy season's torrents and the naval slugfest that defined its naval dimension, reshaping Japanese perceptions from offensive audacity to a defensive crouch born of dawning desperation. The Tokyo Express, a nocturnal shuttle service of fast destroyers and cruisers from Rabaul, averaging 10 runs per month, delivered an additional 20,000 reinforcements over the next 4 months, including the 38th Division and elements of the 2nd Division, yet each subsequent assault echoed the tenor's futility. In the Battle of Edson's Ridge on September 12 to 14, 1942, also known as Bloody Ridge, Kawaguchi's 3,000-man force launched coordinated banzai charges against a 700-man Marine perimeter atop a 1,000-foot spine of jungle-covered hillocks, only to be repulsed by Garand fire and .50 caliber machine guns from the 1st Raider Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson. 850 Japanese perished for 104 American casualties, with the pings of en bloc clips ringing through the night as Marines held their ground in 48 hours of close-quarters hell. The Matanakaw River offensive in late September saw another 1,500 Japanese attackers falter against Puller's reinforced lines, their waves shattered by 105mm howitzer barges from the 11th Marines and the relentless semi-automatic fire of the Garand, which allowed riflemen to maintain suppressive fire without the pause of bolt manipulation. By October, Hayakate's full-scale assault with 20,000 troops, the largest Japanese commitment to a single island battle until Iwo Jima, culminated in the grueling fight for Henderson Field on October 23 to 26, where 3,500 Japanese died assaulting the 164th Infantry Regiment's positions, their Arasakas outranged and outnumbered by the Garand's volume. Logistics crumbled under the Cactus Air Force's hammer. Dauntless dive bombers and P-40 Warhawks, flying 300 sorties weekly from the Coral Runway, sank 80% of the Tokyo Express supply runs, including the destroyer Akatsuki and cruiser Furitaka, in the Battle of Cape Esperance on October 11 to 12. Admiral William Bull Halsey, assuming command of South Pacific Forces on October 18th, encapsulated the shift in a radio message to Nimitz. The position of the enemy is precarious. We must press the attack. The M1 Garand amplified this ideological fracture, its ping evolving from a battlefield sound to a psychological specter that underscored America's material superiority. In the sodden foxholes of the Lunga perimeter, where Marines rotated through 36,000 combatants over the campaign, drawing from the 1st Marine Division, Americall Division, and 25th Infantry, the rifles' clips were expended by the thousands, discarded amid the Kenai grass like cast-offs of Imperial overreach. Tested rigorously in the arid expanses of Nevada Test and Training Range in 1941, where it withstood sand, dust, and extreme temperatures, the Garand was refined through iterative feedback from infantry boards and congressional appropriations under the Lend-Lease Act, embodying a democracy's capacity for adaptive plenty. While Japan, strangled by submarine blockades, rationed steel to 1.5 million tons annually by 1943, issuing 1 rifle per 3 men in some understrength units due to foundry bottlenecks. The U.S. churned out 500,000 Garands yearly from 14 factories, each weapon accompanied by 200 rounds of Lake City arsenal ammunition shipped in 100,000-ton convoys from Espiritu Santo. For Japanese soldiers, surviving on 1,800-calorie diets of polished rice and occasional whale meat, the Garands ping whisper of foes sustained by 4,000-calorie C-ration, canned corned beef, crackers, and fruit, transported by Liberty ships that outproduced Japanese merchant tonnage 3 to 1. This disparity eroded the myth of spiritual supremacy. Diaries recovered from Guadalcanal dead, such as that of Captain Masao Miyazaki of the 4th Regiment, lament, "Their bullets come endless, like rain from the gods they do not worship. Our emperors will falter against such machines." Factual ledgers from both sides underscore the pivot's inexorability, quantifying the campaign's toll in cold, irrefutable numbers that belied the human drama. U.S. Navy records from the advanced base at Noumea, New Caledonia, declassified in the 1950s, detail the naval battle of Guadalcanal on November 12 to 15, 1942, a desperate clash in the slot where Admiral Daniel J. Callahan's Task Force 67 lost 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers but sank 2 Japanese battleships, Hai and Kurishima, 1 heavy cruiser, and 3 destroyers, severing the island's lifeline with 2,000 Japanese sailors lost. Japanese 17th Army after-action reports, captured during the January 1943 mop-up and translated in the 1946 U.S. Army Historical Division's Guadalcanal, the first offensive, tally a staggering 24,111 total casualties by February 7, 1943, when the last 11,000 emaciated troops under Major General Takeo Sugai were evacuated in Operation Coup. Of these, only 10,652 survived the hellish retreat, the remainder dead from combat, starvation, or malaria, with daily death rates reaching 100 in the final. Weeks as supplies dwindled to 200 grams of rice per man. Quotes from frontlines pierce this veil of statistics with raw authenticity. Major Masanobu Tsuji, a brilliant but ruthless staff officer in Rabaul who orchestrated many Pacific operations, reflected in his 1952 memoir, Under the Northern Lights, on the Tenaru's cascading impact. We celebrated shadows in the night, toast to ghosts, only to be consumed by the fire we could not foresee, a fire fed by the enemy's endless iron. On the American side, Puller's commendation to his battalion on August 22nd, read aloud amid the stench of cordite and decay, stated, "You have struck the first blow in the reconquest of the Pacific. The enemy came with all they had, and they died with all they had. The battle's immediate toll, 834 Japanese dead meticulously counted and buried by Marine details using captured shovels versus 44 Marines interred with honors at sea, galvanized U.S. production. In response, Congress in September 1942 approved the full implementation of the Two-Ocean Navy Act of 1940, surging output to 18 fleet carriers and 8 light carriers by mid-1944, while the War Manpower Commission mobilized 6 million women into war industry as the broader Guadalcanal saga unfolded, encompassing 300 ground engagements, 50 naval actions, and 1,500 air sorties. The Garen's role in transformation became emblematic, its sound binding the narrative of ideological realignment. In the hands of the 1st Marine Division's rifle platoons, averaging 40 men each with 200 rounds per fighter, it felled attackers at standoff distances, conserving lives in a theater where Japanese tactics demanded suicidal proximity. This weapon, battle-tested in the Philippine simulations of 1941 and iterated based on feedback from the 4th Marine's China Station, represented abundance as equitable empowerment. Every Marine, regardless of rank or origin, be it the son of a Texas rancher or Navajo code talker's kin, carried the Garand, its design vetted through democratic processes from the House Armed Services Committee to the Oval Office. Japanese countermeasures evolved too late. By November, Hayakate's forces adopted infiltration tactics over mass charges, but shortages forced many to fight unarmed with bamboo spears, their ideology shifting from the offensive bonsai spirit to a grim, hold-at-all-cost defense that foreshadowed the kamikaze desperation of 1944-45. The High Command's pivot was stark. Tojo's cabinet, already strained by Midway's carrier losses for sunk, including Akagi and Kaga, teetered, falling in July 1944 amid cumulative Pacific defeats, with Admiral Yamamoto's assassination in April 1943, shot down by P-38 Lightnings over Bougainville, symbolizing the erosion of strategic genius. Emperor Hirohito's private rescript to his generals in January 1943, leaked in post-war diaries, subtly acknowledged the attrition, endure the trials, for the empire's spirit must outlast the enemy's material storm. For Americans, the victory solidified the narrative of righteous, collective struggle. President Roosevelt's State of the Union address on January 7, 1943, broadcast nationwide, hailed Guadalcanal as the inevitable triumph of free men over the forces of darkness, boosting war bond sales to $185 billion annually. The M1 Garand, with its clips pinged empty across 200 square miles of contested ground, wove through these shifts as an auditory thread, a steady, mechanical heartbeat underscoring the clash of worlds. In rain-lashed nights on the Matanacaw or the bone-dry ridges of the Gifford Line in October, where 1st Battalion, 7 Marines held against 4,000 attackers, the rifle's reliability shone, jamming rates under 1% in mud and salt, per Ordnance Department tests, allowing sustained fire that broke 12 banzai waves. This plenty extended beyond the weapon. U.S. medical evacuations via Douglas C-47s from Henderson Field saved 80% of wounded, contrasting Japanese abandonment rates of 70%, reflecting a democracy's value on the individual over collective horde. By campaign's end, as Major General Van de Grift's forces, now 50,000 strong with Army reinforcements, pushed Japanese remnants into the interior, the Garand had claimed an estimated 5,000 kills, its pings fading into the jungle chorus as the island secured. In the epilogue of Guadalcanal's furious, 6-month chronicle, as the last ragged Japanese stragglers, gaunt phantoms of empire, slipped into malarial embrace of the island's interior mountains, and the stars and stripes fluttered defiantly over the pockmarked runway of Henderson Field, now a hive of P-38s and B-17s. The counterattack emerging from the smoke unveils a timeless verity etched in blood and steel. The M1 Garand, with its resonant ping slicing through the din of premature cheers and shattering illusion, stands as far more than forged iron, walnut, and powder. It embodies a profound abundance of democracy that arms its sons not for blind domination or sacrificial frenzy, but for the deliberate deliverance of a world from tyranny's grasp. In those end block clips expended along the Ilu River's crimson banks, amid the Kenai's whisper and the Slot's restless waves, we glimpse the larger, enduring truth. Freedom's forge yields not an endless cycle of vengeance, but the resilient capacity to outlast oppression's fever rage, where ideology's hollow banners yield to the inexorable tide of shared purpose and innovative will. The vanquished toasts of that humid night dissolve into the island's eternal murmurs, giving way to the steady, unyielding rhythm of a nation's collective resolve, a harmony in which the ping of progress echoes across oceans, ensuring that dawn's redeeming light falls once more on shores reclaimed for liberty's vigilant, abundant watch.